particularly the private sector, you look at Meta, you look at X, if that information is for sale anyways, is it your assertion that we ban all platforms? I know in the United States, the Republicans and even I think some Democrats are pushing for the banning of TikTok, and yet you look at Cambridge Analytica and the lead up to January 6th, that insurrection certainly wasn't based on TikTok. So I wonder if you could comment just about whether or not the outright bans of these platforms is more theater than it is an actual application of a sound policy that wouldn't just see it migrate to other commercial interests like Meta or X.
We definitely see the information aggressors adapting to these measures and migrating to different platforms. But there has been some research, although unfortunately just anecdotal, that they always lose at least some of the audience. Not all of it, but at least some of it. And
just quickly before we end up, I want to go back to the parliamentarian thing. Would you care to comment? Do you think that there should be an opportunity for us to look at the way political parties use, if we're talking about bans, do you think that we might want to look at legislation for partisan political parties to not use these types of tools when it comes to profiling and targeting of people based on algorithms and misinformation?
Very, very quick response.
I'm afraid that with 5 seconds to think, I can't really give you.
Could you submit something for us for the benefit of committee?
I will be happy to try and think about it. Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we like to work on timelines here, Mr. Kolensky. So if you can get it to us perhaps by Friday, if that's possible, I would appreciate that on behalf of the committee. We've got a very limited time for our study here, so we've got to make sure that all the information comes in. That concludes our first panel for today. Mr. Kolensky, Mr. Bridgman, Mr. Chu, thank you for taking the time to be here today and share your information with the committee. It was very helpful. We're going to suspend for a few minutes while we change over the panel, so the meeting is suspended. La réunion.
We will resume. I'd like to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. So we have, as an individual, Patrick White, Associate Professor of Journalism, Media School, UQAM.
We've got Matthew Johnson, who's the Director of Education, and Catherine Hill, who is the Executive Director. Mr. White, we're going to start with you. Vous avez 5 minutes pour votre déclaration.
You have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Le micro, oui, bonjour.
Good day. Hello, everyone, and thank you to the committee members for this invitation. I've been a journalist since 1990 and a professor at the Université du Québec à Montréal for the last 5 years. I think we're really at a crossroads here in 2024 when it comes to disinformation and misinformation. Automation of content has grown since 2022, since the inception of ChatGPT 3.5 in November 2022. And there's also an MIT study from 2018 that indicates that fake news circulates 6 times faster on Twitter than verified news, so there is cause for concern. The situation on X, formerly Twitter, has worsened over the past 18 months since its acquisition or takeover by Elon Musk, following several controversial announcements, including the possibility of obtaining a blue checkmark, an official status, by paying a few dollars a month, and the restitution or the return of ex-President Trump's account in the United States. It's himself a major vector of misinformation. Social media algorithms push content that makes people react through comments, likes, and shares. It amplifies extreme discourse you've seen over the last few years. One of the concerns today is the blocking of news in Canada by Meta since the summer 2023 on Facebook and Instagram. That's also that are also contributing to the growth of disinformation and misinformation in the country by censoring news from the country's media, except for sports and cultural news. A recent study quoted by Reuters says
categorized as unreliable sources climbed to 6.9% in Canada in the 90 days after the ban from Meta, compared to 2.2% in the 90 days before. Ça, c'est une étude citée par l'agence Reuters dans les derniers jours.
That was a quote from Reuters over the last few days. And in my opinion, you should try to unblock news on Facebook and Instagram in Canada by the end of 2024, before the federal election in 25 or 26. The implications of this disinformation are political. On Instagram, for example, you have to click on a tab to see political posts. They've been blocked or voluntarily restricted by Meta for several months. And on Facebook, for Canadian citizens, it's unpleasant. There's bland news as opposed to the country's important news feed, and this is impoverishing the experience and undermining the democratic life of Canadians, not to mention causing a drop in traffic to news sites. According to a news recently published McGill study, our colleague from earlier was mentioning this or was a part of this study. So news has been replaced by memes on Facebook. We're talking about the disappearance of 5 to 8 million views per day on news content in Canada. On the issue of artificial intelligence, the Canadian government will have to act quickly to ban or regulate the distribution of AI-based content, such as deepfakes, audio faking as well. Bill C-63 responds in part to this by criminalizing content that is deemed harmful, but it doesn't go far enough. We need greater transparency in AI-generated content. I'll also have to address the issue of intellectual property. The Journal, there's a recent newspaper that was mentioning this issue. It has to be acted on quickly and not wait 30 years like was the case for C11. Canadian parliamentarians must also declare war on content farms that produce fake news on demand about this country or other countries. There are foreign governments that are behind this, like Russia and China. There are 140 million people that have been exposed to fake news in the U.S. election in 2020, and this is highly concerning in the context of the upcoming presidential elections in November 2024. On this subject, I think it's astonishing that Canada tolerates the dissemination of propaganda press releases from the Chinese Communist Party on CIZIAN's Canadian Newswire. And this has been going on for years. In conclusion, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. It's important that Canada be on a war footing when it comes to misinformation, whether it be, or disinformation, whether it be generated by AI or manually. We need a better framework for generative AI, and we need to protect the intellectual property of Canadian media and artists who could suffer as a result of these technological advances and tools in the coming years. Thank you, Mr. White, for your opening statement. And thank you for respecting your timeline. Thank you.
Committee, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Hill, and I'm proud to serve as the Executive Director of Media Smarts. Our office is located on the unceded Algonquin-Anishinaabe territory, and we are grateful for the invitation to appear today as part of this study. And I'm joined today by Media Smarts Director of Education, Matthew Johnson. So Media Smarts, if you haven't heard of us, is Canada's Centre for Digital Media Literacy. We're a not-for-profit charitable organization, and our vision is that all people in Canada are empowered to engage with all forms of media confidently and critically. To achieve this goal, we advance digital media literacy through world-class research, education, public engagement, and outreach. Through our programs, people in Canada learn to become active, engaged, and informed digital citizens. Digital media literacy is essential to an informed and engaged populace and electorate. Canada is especially in need of a coordinated approach that moves beyond only access and skills-based understanding of digital media literacy. The recent increase in visual disinformation, manipulated images, bots, artificial intelligence, or what we talk about as deep fakes, requires that we seriously engage in countering disinformation. A recent report from StatsCan confirms that people in Canada, around 43%, are feeling overwhelmed by these massive shifts in technology and information. So, for example, photographs and videos used to serve as proof that something occurred or happened in a particular way, and they are no longer reliable. Research shows that people of all ages and beliefs are vulnerable to mis- and disinformation. People in all sectors, including parliamentarians like yourselves, need to know how to verify information and how to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable sources. We need to promote information verification as a social norm and habit in Canada. Knowing and practicing verification skills empowers citizens to mitigate the potential impact of the disinformation and other online harms they encounter. Digital media literacy education has been shown to be an effective approach to addressing misinformation. Around the world, there have been successful interventions with audiences, ranging from elementary students to seniors. And our own Break the Fake program and materials have found to be effective in both our own evaluations and those done by independent evaluators. The last 5 years have also shown that not all approaches are equal. Most importantly, it is essential to focus on discernment over just debunking. Many interventions aimed solely at teaching people to recognize misinformation have a side effect of reducing trust in reliable sources as well, essentially teaching people to be cynical instead of skeptical. As well, evaluations have identified 3 essential elements of a successful digital media literacy intervention. First, focusing on critical thinking and intellectual humility. Second, practical instruction in information triage. And finally, successful interventions recognize that in our networked world that we're all a part of, we are not just consumers of information, but we're also broadcasters of information ourselves. And digital media literacy is essential to combat this mis- and disinformation. For parliamentarians as elected public figures, the stakes of authenticating and verifying information online are even higher, given that you have wide public reach and are considered trusted sources of information. When a trusted source or leader makes a misstep and spreads misinformation, the effects can reach a large and broad audience of Canadians and can erode people's trust in institutions, specifically the government. Parliamentarians and their staff need support to build their digital media literacy skills when it comes to verifying information online. So given all of this, I would like to conclude by providing 2 recommendations. First, we recommend that Parliament, both in the House and Senate, require mandatory training for all parliamentarians and their staff on how to verify information and combat mis- and disinformation. Second, as we have recommended consistently for over 15 to 20 years, we recommend that the Government of Canada develop a digital media literacy strategy that will include supporting all people in Canada with the skills to navigate the online information ecosystem confidently and critically. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Hill, and thank you for being on time as well. We're going to start with our first 6-minute round with Mr. Brock for 6. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your attendance. I'm going to start with you, Mr. White. I'm reading from an article titled AI-Powered Disinformation is Spreading. Is Canada ready for the political impact? It starts by talking about a story regarding Slovakia's national election last fall. Just days before the election, a mysterious voice recording began spreading a lie online. The manipulated file made it sound like Mikhail Semenka, leader of the Progressive Slovakia Party, was discussing buying votes with a local journalist, but the conversation never happened. The file was later debunked as a deep fake hoax. On election day, Semenka lost to the pro-Kremlin populist candidate Robert Fico in a tight race. While it's nearly impossible to determine whether the deep fake file contributed to the final results, the incident points to a growing fear about the effect products of artificial intelligence are having on democracy around the world, and in particular Canada. According to Caroline Xavier, head of the Communications Security Establishment, this is what we fear. There could be a foreign interference so grave that then the electoral results are brought into question. We know that misinformation and disinformation is already a threat to democratic processes. AI will potentially add to that amplification. That is quite concerning. What is Canada currently doing, in your opinion, to address this threat, or what should they be doing?
Well, Canada is already working hard with what they did with C18 and C11 for Canadian content, and with C63, it's going to fight misinformation and contenu préjudiciable as well. Are we doing enough? Probably no, but AI is an opportunity as well as a threat. And as far as deep fakes are concerned, I would strongly urge the government to legislate on that matter within the next 12 to 18 months, especially deep fake videos, deep fake audio as well, which you mentioned. So we have a lot to work on in the next 12 months on that issue, taking into context the upcoming federal election in Canada.
Correct. Mr. Chair, can you alert me when there's 2 minutes remaining, please? Turning now to Ms. Hill and Mr. Johnson, thank you for your attendance. I enjoyed our discussion in my office a few weeks ago. I listened to your opening statement very carefully, Ms. Hill. You talked about some suggestions for parliamentarians moving forward, mandatory training, and a digital media strategy for the government as a whole. Can you add a little more meat to that particular discussion, please?
Certainly, around the digital media literacy strategy?
Both? Yeah.
We know that most of us have not received education on how to verify information well. And certainly any of us who are beyond a certain age have not received any ever. But additionally, the information environment is so rapidly changing in the volume and velocity of information that we're receiving. And we don't, what used to be a reliable source and you only went to 1 or 2 sources doesn't exist anymore. There's a huge menu available to us. So we think that folks who work for government, parliamentarians and their staff, are as vulnerable as any of us are to being fooled, to being, to reading something and not knowing how to verify well and easily, both for their personal lives and their professional lives. And we know that there are really easy skills that folks can learn very quickly that will help them feel confident about the information they're consuming, knowing what's a reliable source and knowing how to identify it, and then sharing good information, because that's what we really need to see happen.
And your comments on the media strategy?
Well, other nations in the world, we heard referenced earlier this morning, have had strategies in place, some for more than 15 years, but certainly
2 minutes, Mr.
most countries in the world are adopting strategies that address this from a holistic perspective. So appreciating it's a complex problem. There's so many factors that impact so many different government departments, all levels of government. We need to bring everyone together to look at how we're going to address this problem, because it's only going to get worse.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hill. I cede the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Couric.
Thanks very much, Mr. Brock, and welcome, and appreciate the work you do. And I know, likewise, when we had a chance to have a discussion and developing a national strategy, I referenced that under the previous Harper Conservative government, there was a national financial literacy framework that I think would provide a great model for helping promote the sort of things that you're talking about. But I would simply ask for Canadians who might be watching, the resources that Media Smarts has, both for parents, for young people, for teenagers, for people that might have a little bit of snow on the roof, how would they access those resources through your organization?
Sure. So everything we do is free. Everything is available on our website. In English, it's mediasmarts.ca. Thank you for letting me do this. And in French, it's abiomedia.ca. Everything is always fluently bilingual and available to educators, trusted guardians, parents, and even some resources for youth themselves. So we encourage, if you have any question about media or the digital space, please access our website. It's all there for you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Couric. Ms. Damoff for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to three of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. White, I'm going to start with you. Ms. Hill mentioned trusted sources, and I would argue most Canadians would think that political parties are trusted sources. But, you know, there's conspiracy theories that are being actively promoted by the Conservative Party, that the pandemic was a plot by global financial elites trying to re-engineer our economy, that our climate policies are an attempt to limit movement and create 15-minute cities to limit personal freedom. 15-minute cities are a legitimate urban planning concept, but they've been twisted around. And even the World Economic Forum, that it's an elitist global conspiracy controlling governments around the world. Just a few minutes ago at the Finance Committee, Yvonne Baker said, "Who's the most dangerous dictator in the world?" And one after another, 3 Conservative members said, Justin Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, to which he responded, "It's actually Vladimir Putin." When we have legitimate parties promoting these kinds of discourse amongst the Canadian public, it's leading to mistrust in our democratic institutions. And I wonder if you could just speak to how dangerous it is when we do have trusted sources, or what should be trusted sources, spreading this kind of information.
Well, the mistrust overall is targeting institutions, including the media and politicians. And one of the other factors that we should also consider is the development and the increase of news avoidance from Canadians in the past few years, especially after 2 long years of pandemic. So I think news avoidance is truly a really big factor to consider. How can we fight news avoidance? And I do believe that media literacy programs, compulsory, like Quebec has announced starting September 2025, could be a solution, among others, to fight disinformation at the media level and also at the political level.
Thank you. And I wonder, Ms. Hill, if you could, you've been doing this work since the mid-1990s, Media Smarts has. So you've seen a lot of change over the years. I wonder if you can comment on how it's changed and how the landscape has changed, and what impacts you're seeing on not only politicians, but on society in general.
I'll start and my colleague may join. So how it has changed? Everything has changed, really. I think one of the pieces that's really helpful to think about is that each one of us, we used to receive information, and we were at the receiving end of media. It was fed to us, and we basically trusted it. As the internet grew, and our information grew. And so now sources, we're talking about information, not news, so it's important to make that distinction. But we're also talking about each and every one of us being at the center of a huge system and network. And those networks are vast and immeasurable, frankly. We don't know what something we put online can go to 10 people or 10 million people. And so how we all communicate is very, very different. Additionally, what's added a challenge is the volume and the velocity of the information that is overwhelming people, contributing to that news avoidance. And the biggest change is that we no longer have the luxury of the privilege of just receiving. We have to actively engage. We have to be educated. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to verify. We have to determine for ourselves what's reliable. And we need to build the resilience of our citizens so that they can also learn those skills and know how to do that for themselves, because that is the best way to combat this. I mean, we need regulation, absolutely. There's no question. We need all sectors of society participating in this. But from our perspective and where our expertise is in what works and what will help at the individual level on the ground. And we know that education will do that.
I would add, too, the most recent major change has been the use of recommendation algorithms and sorting algorithms that curate our information ecosystem. We have moved from an environment where most of the information that we consumed was curated by humans, where even if we didn't necessarily have access to the rooms where it happened, those processes were documented, they were understandable. And we're now at a situation where that is being done in a way that is not knowable to the consumer, and in many cases is not knowable even to the people who operate these platforms, because these are artificially intelligent machine learning algorithms, and frequently they make decisions based on data or proxy data that may be inaccurate, that may be discriminatory, that may in some cases lead people who have already begun consuming some conspiracy or disinformation, adjacent information will lead them down rabbit holes. But in an even broader sense, it makes us alienated from our information ecosystem because we don't know how these decisions are being made. We know from our own research and research that's been done elsewhere that this is not inevitable, that people can take more control over their information diet, and that people who have a self-curated media diet are more resilient to disinformation. So that's the latest major change, or the latest major addition to our digital media literacy approach. It's something that we're constantly iterating on in the basis of changes in the environment and new research.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Damos. Mr. Villemure pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Villemure, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam. I have a question for you. You were referring to critical thinking. Is that something that's just vanished from society?
I certainly wouldn't say that critical thinking has vanished from society. It's a difficult thing to measure. But what we do know is that, as Ms. Hill referenced, the heart of critical thinking is intellectual humility. It is being willing to recognize that we might be wrong. And it is being willing to set standards under which we would change our minds. So we do know that, in general, the English language and, so far as I know, French language media environment has become more polarized. That remains less true in Canada than in the United States, but it has become more polarized than it was in the past.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. White, thank you for being here. You are really the person to invite, clearly. I missed the beginning of your presentation. But is it possible to get the copies of yes, I provided that, and as well as all the sources of my information. Thank you. I have a few quick questions, rapid fire, and then some general questions. The University of Montreal center called CRIM has created an algorithm that can identify deep fakes before they inflict any damage. Is this credible? Yes, absolutely. There are tools also to test the virality of information, like crop time kill, which Meta is going to block access to for the new researchers and colleagues of mine. Yes, there's a way, indeed, to have some idea based on that type of technology and to identify what might go viral quickly. This is something that's been in existence for a few years. The media will use this choice to select a homepage, for instance, or select other information that they're going to be sending out quickly to the citizens, to people online. Do you think something like TikTok could condition, in a way, some segments of the population? Well, one of the dangers of TikTok is that it's essentially a search engine for people between 10 and 30, and we know that TikTok is not a search engine, and we know that there are some major concerns as to potential transmission of data from Canada towards the PRC authorities, and we also know that there's a 270-day a timeline before it's blocked in the U.S., and we know in 2025. So this is something perhaps we should also think about. In Canada, it's a source of significant information among the youth, and it's become a search engine that has replaced Google for many young people, so it can be a major concern. And also, TikTok is an entertainment network and not an information network. Thank you very much. Over time, given fake news and alternative facts, do you think lying has become socially acceptable? Clearly, amplification caused by social media and polarization in politics, loss of confidence in the media, all of this is taking part in this but I wouldn't go that far. Earlier on, even if it can't be true, it can almost, it can seem that way, right? Yeah, and that's specifically why I push for media literacy training in primary school, middle school, and high school, even among seniors, digital training in a way so that people are aware of the fact that if they put something on social media, then the next day can be on page 1 of the National Post, or many Canadians can access that information. People would think again twice or maybe 100 times before they would post anything. I never use really social media because it's not media. Facebook is not going to ever have journalists in Moose Jaw or in Rimouski, but we need our information media. I support the federal program for supporting in its turn the media, and it's important. The importance of our media. I wouldn't want them to disappear. Absolutely, certainly. For our part, we support local media, and that's important. You talked about noise avoidance in a way. The media that we're talking, the media that was cut off from what we've been cut off from in terms of Facebook, the idea that Facebook would no longer want the news broadcast on its site, is that a news avoidance? Absolutely. It's like a act of a bad corporate citizen. It's unacceptable that news would be blocked in Canada, the only G7 country where we can't have access to information when there are forest fires in the Northwest Territories. There could be elections in the U.S. in early November, federal elections likely next year, and that's a major issue for society, that blocking of news in the country. The use of deep fakes, is that potentially going to happen? Yes. There is often transparency of the tools. Often media have charters where they have to say they're using artificial intelligence or not. The media will be transparent. We should require the same thing from algorithms and social media. The good thing is given the role of the media, there are agreements with the major press, like Canadian Press and others, Reuters, like the AP, the major four. In a few minutes or in a few hours, you can debunk the videos. But it's extremely concerning because, yes, this will happen in the next federal election. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Green, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to try to the best of my ability to get through this round and allow each of the guests to be able to answer because it is ultimately our responsibility to get back some good recommendations. And while some have been put forward in the opening remarks, I wanted the opportunity for our guests to be able to expand on it. So could you please provide examples of best practices in other jurisdictions of countering disinformation and misinformation and malinformation in the work of parliamentarians? We can go from Mr. White over. It doesn't matter the order of operations here.
I cannot speak. I'll start, and Matthew, you can add.
Sure.
I can't speak specifically to in the work of parliamentarians per se. We haven't researched that. We have looked at in society writ large, so for all citizens. And we have made the assumption that parliamentarians are citizens as well, and so hence what is valuable to citizens will be valuable to parliamentarians and their staff as well.
Has there been any reflection or conversation around the use of these tools by political parties?
Okay, has there been any reflection by us about the use of Can you just clarify the question?
I'm wondering, so you're using, your information to inform the public, but I'm wondering if in your studies or areas of interest, you have given consideration to the way in which political parties could potentially use these tools and tactics to, further exacerbate some of the divisions and social upheaval that we're seeing.
We have not done that work. No, just to clarify.
Mr. White,
okay.
That's okay. I'll just go on to the next. Mr. White, on the topic of best practices.
I would recommend you to look at the leadership of the European Union, l'Union Européenne, the strength of 28, 29 countries, funding heavily media literacy programs and programs against disinformation. If you look at their website and all the conferences that they have held in the past few years, EU is the place to look for. And to inspire
are you
yourself.
finding in your studies that their recommendations or policies that have been put in place, their laws, have yielded any kind of discernible result? Is there a way to track the effectiveness of it?
They are able in France, and they have been doing so for years, to impose major fines to Meta and Google for lack of respect of privacy or other issues, even the push for royalties for news media organization across EU. So yes, they have a leadership position in all these fields.
And there is evidence from other nations who have strategies to support that the strategies are working. It was mentioned earlier this morning. Finland is an excellent example. They've been doing this work for quite a long time. They have adopted an approach that is about educating all ages, from daycare to seniors' homes, and really focused on building the capacity of their citizens to recognize and identify when there is mis or disinformation present. And they have excellent evaluation and research that's showing they are much more resilient, as was mentioned earlier this morning, to any efforts to try and influence citizens with mis or disinformation. They're much more competent and capable and empowered. So we did a research study with funding from the Government of Canada, and we talked to 7 or 8 different countries about the initiatives that they've undertaken. We're happy to make that research and report available to you folks, but absolutely the EU is doing wonderful work. Finland, Latvia, Australia, the UK has made phenomenal progress in the past 4 to 5 years. So it's Canada was a leader in media literacy. We have a fabulous tradition. We would love to see that continue. We're a little bit behind, but we have every opportunity to catch up and surpass, because we have amazing people in our country who are phenomenal experts in this area.
I'll share with you in a little bit of humility. I think somebody had mentioned kind of your own intellectual honesty. There have been moments where I may have retweeted something that wasn't 100% factually correct, that had, caused concern or perhaps harm in communities. Recognizing that, of course, you want to delete it. You want to address it in a way that addresses the harm that is caused. And so I'm wondering, Ms. Hill, could you provide consideration in future work, perhaps, to help us as parliamentarians create resources to ensure that we're not spreading misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation? And to both witnesses, Mr. White as well, could you also perhaps reflect on ways in which we need to raise our accountability in public discourse to make sure the things that we're talking about are indeed factual, and perhaps provide some kind of ethical guidelines in the way in which, as elected officials with national platforms, that we are holding ourselves to a higher level of accountability and ethical standards when it comes to this? Because in populist moments, and I won't even say whether they're left or right populist moments, but in populist moments where the velocity of information spreads like wildfire, I would just hope that our committee could come forward in a nonpartisan way with some recommendations that help reflect that. Is that something you're willing to help with, Ms. Hill and Mr. White?
Very quick response.
Yes, we'd be thrilled to.
Okay.
It'd be a pleasure, absolutely.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We're going to go to the next round, 2.5 minutes each, because there is a bit of committee business that I need to take care of, and we're done at 1:05 on the clock. Mr. Kirk, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, and I hope that our friends from Media Smarts can provide, and then I do have another question that I'd like to ask. But quite often, one of the challenges is the conversation around information, misinformation, disinformation becomes inherently political, because it's to somebody's political advantage to simply accuse their opponents of lying. And something that I hear a lot about, being a rural member of Parliament, is the firearms debate. And so I'm not asking you to take a position on that, but that's certainly something that I've heard a ton of misinformation, including from political parties in this place. So not that issue, but how do we make sure that we provide media literacy, that we can combat misinformation, disinformation in a way that acknowledges that there is also a valid policy and political debate that can be had in the midst of some of those what can be tough conversations.
One of the fundamental aspects of digital media literacy is understanding the difference between fact and opinion. It's one of the things we teach starting in elementary school because it's fundamental to having any kind of reasoned debate, as you say. Beyond dividing those two, beyond dividing whether we're discussing an opinion and discussing facts, media literacy helps us to identify which sources of information are reliable. And so it is only when we can divide opinion and fact, and when we, on all sides of an issue, are drawing from reliable, verifiable sources of information that we can have that debate.
And if I could, because I'm pretty sure I'm close to being out of time, but would it be helpful if, for example, the next recommendations, if there was something on these sites, something that simply said, look, here is the algorithm, some algorithmic transparency that would be beneficial, that at least that information is then put forward, and maybe just a yes or no answer from both our witnesses. Is that something that might be helpful?
The short answer is it's complicated, but yes, there are ways of doing it.
Okay.
And it would be valuable, yes.
Yes, and transparency and total transparency is the key to fight opacity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kirk. Mr. Baines, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for joining us today. I'll begin with Ms. Hill on Media Smarts. How far is it reaching? I have teenage kids, so very interested in this topic. I also I'm a university lecturer, and I actually spent a full 3-hour course on how to find sources, the correct sources, and how things like Wikipedia people think is real. It's like everything on there is believable. So and how far you need to actually look deeper into, say, any magazine, or online page, and how much actual research you yourself have to do to get to what a real a credible source is. So I wanted to see how far you're reaching across Canada, and like what age levels, and maybe if you're actually describing these things in that manner. And I mean, this is of course like a K-12 system versus a university level where there's better comprehension.
So our reach is good, could be much better. So we're a small organization. We're actually only 12 staff. We're project funded, so we exist and survive by responding to calls for proposals for funding related to digital media literacy. That being said, our worst nightmare is that we create these phenomenal resources that sit on a website that no one sees. So we work very hard to build our audience. We know that our educational resources, for example, get over 1 million views a year. A lot of our projects or research, when we're promoting it, will get tens of millions of views, perhaps.
So just to, I know we have a little bit of time. So I know that educators are the focus. You're sort of telling them about your program, and therefore are they subscribing to it, or how are they receiving it, and how further is the program going?
Yes, we work with all of the departments of education in all the provinces and territories. We maintain an educational contact list that has over 1,500 educators at all levels of all ministries, and we promote our resources to them. We know we have thousands of teachers who are accessing our resources. Everything's available for free. Everything is tied distinctly for every province and territory to every curriculum. So you can be a grade 8 math teacher in Newfoundland and find a lesson related to media literacy, or a grade 3 English teacher in the Yukon.
And then what are the results?
Thank you, Mr. Baines. That's 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Hill. Monsieur Villemure, 2 minutes et demi.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur White.
So we're here in the Ethics Committee, and we have some recommendations to make on disinformation and misinformation. Now, in the little time I have, in the 2 minutes I have, my question to you would be, what are your recommendations in order to reduce the damage done by disinformation?
My apologies. I really enjoy Mr. Villemur's interventions, and unfortunately it's not being broadcast through the English channel of the translation.
Okay, we'll attempt to work on that. I've stopped the clock. J'ai arrêté le temps, Monsieur Villemur.
Is it possible to restart it, Mr. Chair? Because I completely missed everything that he said.
We can do that. Go. Is it work? Is it working now?
Can you hear me? So I'll be speaking in French to make sure that the translation is going through. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. White, we are the Committee on Ethics, Personal Life, and Privacy, and we have to bring forward some recommendations on the effects or consequences of disinformation and misinformation. So I would like to hear your recommendations. What should we put in our report? As I said this morning, it's very important to bring forward a bill to go against deep fakes, whether they are videos or recordings. We have also to legislate artificial intelligence, whether it be chatbots or others. We also have to have full transparency of algorithms from social media. And I think that one of the other 4 important objectives on the short and long term would be education. Education focused on media literacy, on information and disinformation in primary schools, secondary schools, universities, and why not also for the elderly who haven't had the same education. I didn't have a phone in my hand until 2000 or 2004.
So that's what I'm talking about, supporting the media, financially, information media, so that our ecosystem is fine. What about European Union standards? Are they the gold standard, if you will? Or is that something, this legislation to be created? Clearly, the European Union is 30 countries, so it would have high impact. I think we could gain some inspiration from what they're doing. Look at what France has done. So they prohibit fake news during election campaigns. We wouldn't want to amplify anything in Canada, but we could certainly gain inspiration from that French legislation to counter disinformation, specifically during federal election campaigns or provincial or municipal. Madam Hill, in a few words, what would be your recommendations? If you could send them in writing, if you don't have time to finish this, how do we reduce the negative effects of misinformation to disinformation?
They would be almost identical to Mr. White's. Okay. So obviously, we're terribly biased, but we believe 100%, and the evidence supports it, education. We need to have education for our citizens, for our children, for our youth, for our adults, for seniors. We know, and over the past 5 years, we've learned and evidence has supported that it really works. It really does make a difference. We just need to reach everyone and provide them with that opportunity.
Merci, Monsieur Villemur, Ms. Hill. Go ahead, Mr. Green, for 2.5.
Thank you. I should note that there were some additional translation issues on the back end of this broadcast, but I digress. I would like to, although education certainly is a big proactive step in the continuum of misinformation, disinformation, I wonder if the members could provide some insight, again, going back to accountability. From their perspectives, if there's anything missing, what should we be considering at this committee as recommendations to help provide better legislative, regulatory, in some instances perhaps criminal responses to the accountability of the willful spread? And I give reference to the way in which these are sometimes used to fill hate, used to incite political violence, social violence, targeting minority groups. I referenced the trans community, indigenous community, black community, Jewish community, Muslim community, you name it. I'm wondering if you could just reflect on how we can better hold people accountable, or platforms or corporations more broadly.
Outside of education, we don't have recommendations on policy because that's outside of our mandate. But what I can say from our research is that many people who have been victims of some of the things you've been describing have said that when they have gone to law enforcement for support, the people that they've encountered have not been sufficiently well informed about these phenomena. So just as it is important to have policymakers and parliamentarians trained in these issues, it really is important to support law enforcement and make sure that they have been educated in these issues so that when someone comes to them with one of these issues, or for instance, having been the victim of a pornographic deepfake, which we know are in fact the vast majority of uses of that technology, they're familiar with the laws, they're familiar with the regulations, they understand enough about the digital media world that they are able to be of help.
That's good. Thank you very much, Mr. White.
Yes, first of all, we need to protect ASAP the intellectual property of media and artists across Canada because of the effect of AI right now, which will have a huge effect on intellectual property in Canada. Prohibit the use of deepfakes ASAP, and as far as social networks are concerned, we need to legislate to impose and compel total transparency of algorithms to better understand what's going on in terms of flow of information and disinformation.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes the panel. I want to thank all our witnesses, Ms. Hill, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. White for being here today and participating in this important study. And on behalf of Canadians, thank you for the work. And on behalf of the committee, thank you for coming. Okay, so I'm going to dismiss you. We are going to deal with a little bit of committee business here. As you know, we received a letter from the RCMP Commissioner based on Mr. Green's request. The letter came in on April 26th. That's in relation to SNC Lavalin. I just wanted to inform the committee that we're still waiting for the translated documents from Mr. Wernick. So what I need the committee to consider is where we go based on not just what we received from the RCMP Commissioner, but also from Mr. Wernick as well. And that should be, I expect that should be coming soon from translation. So I know that the study called for one meeting. But if there's any consideration that any additional work needs to be done on this, I want the committee to consider that as we move forward. Okay, so Mr. Barrett, go ahead.
It's on a separate matter, Chair. So
okay.
If you're done with that.
Okay, so I am done with that,
Okay.
but I just want the committee to be aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead on that.
I'm a little confused. Are you asking for us to approve something now before we even have the information?
Just
okay.
based on this information
Yeah.
received from the RCMP Commissioner,
Yeah.
we'll be getting that the other information from Mr. Wernick. We've not finalized the study. So based on this and based on what we get from Mr. Wernick, I'm going to need direction from
Okay.
committee as to where you want to go on the SNC level.
And do we know when we're getting the
It
translated?
should be coming soon. The expectation was the 29th, which was yesterday,
Yeah.
but it should be coming soon.
Okay. Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Monsieur Villemure.
C'est une question d'organisation.
For organization purposes, for our committee business, how much time are we expecting? Because we have to be elsewhere as well. Are we be done at 1 or are we going beyond?
Mr. Barrett has something he'd like to say. So 1:05 is what time we'd be done at. Okay? Go ahead, Mr. Housefather.
Mr. Chair, I also wanted to just mention, I found some things in the RCMP letter a bit strange, particularly blaming the war in the Ukraine for the delay in terms of transmission of the information. Would there be a consideration of asking them further questions about that?
Good.
Okay,
We
because
could do that.
having read the response,
Well, this is why I brought it up today, because there are some things that perhaps were of concern to committee members. And if there are concerns, then I would ask that you address them to the clerk and, again, consider as we move forward on the SNC Lavalin issue, because we're not completed that study, pending this information and the other information from Mr. Wernick being received. So we may, in fact, want to call Mr. Duhaime back, or we may want to provide some clarification. We're certainly getting into the letter writing business on this committee lately. So go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Chair, with the last 5 minutes, I have a motion I'd like to move. That pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and in light of recent media reports, the committee undertake a study into Minister Randy Boissonneau's alleged contravention of ethics and lobbying laws forthwith, that the committee invite Minister Randy Boissonneau and Kirsten Poon to testify individually in addition to any other relevant witnesses, and that the committee report its findings to the House. Chair, this has been circulated to all members of the committee in both official language, so I'll speak to it briefly, knowing that we have limited time. You know, we have a mandate at this committee to review matters of this nature, and this is just the latest in a series of unethical dealings by the Trudeau government. It's bombshell news that broke in global news. And this is a Trudeau government minister involved in lobbying the government, and there is potential illegality with respect to the Lobbying Act, and of course questions of the Conflict of Interest Act and the Conflict of Interest Code for members. Minister Boissonneau lost his seat in the 2019 election, then an MP, and he restarted his company Xenex to lobby the Trudeau government, that for whom he was previously an MP. The minister tried to shield this from the public by hiding behind his business partner and lobbyist. Their only client was the Edmonton International Airport. They received $25 million in pandemic recovery funds in 2021, 1 month before he was named the Liberal candidate and just 2 months before the federal election. The meetings took place in 2021 and 2022 that helped bring in $110 million in federal grants to the Edmonton International Airport. So it was revealed that the minister and his lobbyist business partner still have ties, and in fact, Minister Randy Boissonneau withheld the name of the business that he was receiving payments from, and he failed to disclose the name of Navis Group, which was rebranded from his company. A bit of sleight of hand here, Chair. The trading name versus the corporate name. So someone would have to do a corporate records search to determine that this deception was happening. So this company that he's receiving payments from is simultaneously lobbying the government, including the finance department, for whom he was the associate finance minister. So they got direct access to the finance minister, the deputy prime minister, for a meeting on hydrogen fuel development. And within months of the meeting, Chair, the minister made an announcement at the Edmonton International Airport awarding local hydrogen fuel initiatives with $9.74 million in federal funds. So it's troubling. It's unacceptable. Obviously, this wouldn't be the kind of practice that Canadians would accept in private business, but it is a pattern with this Trudeau Liberal government. They're once again caught doing business unethically with taxpayer funds. It's undermining public trust. That's why we need to have hearings on this, Chair, and look forward to the motion passing swiftly.
So just so that I'm clear, you're moving the motion, correct? Yes. Okay, we're in committee business. The motion has been properly moved. Mr. Fisher, I'm sorry I missed your hand before. I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak, but we are dealing with a motion right now. Is it regarding this? I have to adjourn the meeting at 1:05. We don't have any other resources. So either way, whether we start this now, it's going to end at 1:05. So on that, do you have anything you want to say, Mr. Fisher?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. You've got a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to have to cut you off. So
yeah. I mean, the piece in the Global repeatedly acknowledged that Minister Boissonneau has always followed all of the ethics rules that apply to him as an elected official. It even includes confirmation of this from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Global even quoted, I believe, experts that was the case. From what I can see in the article, Minister Boissonneau has done nothing wrong. I think that your motion, Mr. Baird, is clearly reaching. Certainly, if it's something that the commissioners see an interest in studying and taking a look at, certainly we didn't move forward with a motion to do a study on Jenny Byrne as she was related to Pierre Poilievre in the office of the Conservative opposition leader, because it's being studied, it's being looked at by the commissioner. We'll wait to see if where there's smoke, there's fire. I don't see this at this moment as something that this committee needs to, we've certainly got names that we can add to that study if the committee is so eager, if the Conservatives are so eager to bring forward a conversation on this. We've got names that we can add to that we can certainly make that study a little bit more fulsome. Certainly some names from Forecheck. But I would suggest that if the commissioners feel that there's something here, then they will take a peek at that. And Mr. Baird, I'm sure you remember the commissioners saying that members can reach out to them about some of their concerns. But I don't see that as something that should be started here at this committee and impede the things that we've worked on and to build a